Today on the show, strategy plus action equals innovating with the Department of Defense.
Success in business and life is a constant back and forth of charting your course and taking the consistent steps every day to move you forward. Both are critical. My guests on this show range from hardworking entrepreneurs starting from scratch to visionary leaders of cutting-edge companies looking to scale. I help you understand the strategies that are working for them and the actions you can take to model their success. For me, a show like this is all about joining forces with my guests to dig deep and create something new for you. Whether that's a small insight to get you unstuck or a path of massive growth through customized marketing and creative sales initiatives. Welcome to Strategy in Action.
I'm so happy to have David Shaw on the show today. David, how is it going?
Great seeing you. Great seeing you. It's going well. Going well. We're still pushing the rock up the hill, but we see the top of the mountain.
David is a co-founder and the Chief Commercialization Officer at Astrapi, and it is mind-blowing, the technology that you guys are developing, and I will not even begin to try to explain it. Give people in a nutshell what Astrapi is all about, and some of the, I mean, you've got several right now, but some of those key technologies that you've been developing.
Yeah, so Astrapi, my co-founder, CEO, Gerald Prothero, and I met in Dallas several years ago in a serendipity networking event, similar to how you and I met, actually. And he was doing an exploration of Euler's formula and figured out some things and discovered nobody had done that before. It could have been done 250 years ago. And then the question was, okay, is that useful? And he very quickly realized that it's the core mathematics behind how you send and receive communication signals. And
Okay,
so
just tell me that name again.
Euler, it's Euler, Leonard Euler. And so
Okay.
many think that his formula is the most elegant, including Richard Feynman, the most elegant in all of mathematics, because it brings each of the most common uses of math all together in one place. But essentially, it helps set the table to create signals in the complex plane, using complex circles. What we're doing is we're using spirals. So we're using polynomials instead of sinusoids. That allows us to generate spirals in the complex plane. So that's never been done before. And we've got the
And so explain that even a little bit more of like in the to do what?
Yeah, in lay terms, what's driving all of this is that you've got a finite amount of communication spectrum. You've got a finite amount of bandwidth. That's been acutely brought to the forefront with sheltering in place, with telemedicine, with remote learning, with live streaming, with gaming, with enhanced 4K, 8K video. All of that puts stress on communication networks. And the reason is you've got a finite amount of it. You can't go build more. And each of the frequency bands aren't the same. Some are much better than others. So the channels are packed. The way you create signals in the physical layer is you're basically using sinusoids with constant amplitude. So you've probably seen an AM or FM diagram. Okay, so that's a amplitude value where you've got a constant peak and valley over a symbol time in a particular frequency. So we're generating spirals, and that's never been done before, and we're using continuously varying amplitude. So the implication and why what we're doing is so interesting and important, it is allows you to put more information in a narrower range of frequencies using less required signal power or some combination of those. So we're able to get more cars on the freeway. I had somebody come up with a really nice analogy where it's similar to the elevator. Back 100 years ago, you topped out at 5 or 6 floors. That's the most people could reasonably walk up and down. And once the elevator came, all of a sudden you can go 100 plus floors, but you're on the same real estate. Well, spectrums is effectively the same. You've got a finite amount of information that can get through those existing channels. We're coming in and saying, well, wait a minute, we can do more. And so the timing on that is it is a hugely expensive problem to solve. So right now, since the existing approaches have pretty much hit their theoretic limit, the way you solve that's by basically putting more nodes out there. So that's why you have development of 5G. That's why you have development of low Earth orbit satellite constellations. That's why you have advanced antenna arrays, is to meet this exponential growth in demand, because you're really hobbled with the supply.
Oh yeah, and like you mentioned, like this was necessary a couple of years ago when I first heard about what you had
Yeah,
going on. This past year, like you said, it's just through the roof, right? In need, and I think that was what was so surprising to me is I never thought in those terms. I didn't realize at all that bandwidth like that was had a limit at all. I thought
yeah.
this was all just this ethereal. It's just there, like air. It's just there. So that's fascinating. So you're saying also that even 5G and these other technologies that are being developed, those are just more of the same in the sense of still dealing with the same
Same
limited
problem,
bandwidth.
same fundamental problem. You've got constrained communication channels. You've got the relationship with signal power, how much power it takes to get from point A to point B. And then you've got, of course, the sticky little question about interference um, with adjacent channels or with your own signals. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a relationship of the power and what you're trying to do. And then the fourth leg of that is for defense uses. You've got all of those same issues, but you're operating in harsh, contested environments with someone trying to jam your signal, and
Right.
or trying to operate where you don't want them to know you're there,
Right.
right? So it's not an insignificant challenge, and the dependency on the communication link is quite profound.
Wow. So where are you in the development of everything? What's in terms of, hey, we've got it. Hey, we're at stage this, in developing this whole new technology.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in terms of readiness level, that I think was first developed by NASA on one of the capabilities were TRL4. So that means we're in hardware, internal lab validation, and we're working on our second generation using the Xilinx platform, software defined radio platform. And so the significance of all of that is it's gone from an idea that's really coming out of the ground, literally on the back of a napkin, validated the math through simulation with some really spectacular results on into hardware in our first generation software defined radio, which is a single channel. That's where we're able to demonstrate an over 2x win in signal power, meaning we can send the same information, but using 2x or more less required power. So that's got some huge ramifications for an awful lot of things. And now we then jumped off the high dive into the state of the art Xilinx platform. And so that allows us to take it as a software demonstration on this off the shelf Xilinx platform into defense and commercial labs, which is where we are with that. That whole technology, spiral modulation, is really built on spectral efficiency. So it's not a waveform, it's a way to use the waveform design space where you may want high throughput or you may want very low signal power or the combination of the two. And using polynomials gives us an unlimited selection. And so we're working to optimize how we select the polynomial for a particular use. So it completely flips the question from how much bandwidth do you have or need to what are you trying to achieve? And it may be you want to put a 4K camera on a UAV for agricultural purposes, or it may be you want to extend the mission life by not chewing up your battery, or you want a lower form factor to reduce the size of your power amplifier. So that's all spiral modulation. There's two more capabilities that have come out of that are quite interesting. One is symbol waveform hopping. And it's akin to frequency hopping, which is a really, really cool story that goes back to World War II and Hedy Lamarr and patents and being rejected, and then ultimately being right. It's just one of the coolest stories most people have never heard of. But it's basically being able to hop frequencies to keep people from picking up your signals and avoiding jamming and things like that. So symbol waveform hopping is akin to that in name only, but we're using the symbol alphabets in the time domain. So it's not it's a way to secure a transmission and we're using the communication noise floor against our adversary. So it's really, really difficult to come in and disrupt that. So that's relatively new. We're pushing that out to have some interest from the Air Force and some others on that. The third is even more interesting from a innovation standpoint is we're not dependent upon the Fourier transform to communicate. So that establishes, it goes back to, again, some of the core of communications theory. In existing spectrum analyzers, almost all of them are built with that in mind. So we had to figure out a way to measure our capability. And we actually had to go get old hardware swept tune spectrum analyzers off eBay, HP, that are 20 plus years old, and then thought, okay, we got to figure out an alternative. So we figured out a software capability that we've got in laptops we've been using for some time. We calibrated it against the state of the art in existing modulation schemes, and all that checked out. And then, towards the end of last year, we finally got, we got our third validation point. One was from a Canadian partner, one was from the Naval Information Warfare Center, and one was from Southwest Research Institute, that the spectrum analyzer measurements held. And so we all looked at each other, and it's like, okay, well, we're a bunch of knuckleheads. There's probably a product here. And so shifted the code out of the simulation R&D software into Python. I'd been using it for our own account and are now what's TRL6. So we've got external validation and can migrate that more quickly as a software app into handheld devices or portable devices. So that means we can put it in devices in drones. We can do it in CubeSats. We can do it in handheld devices on the ground. And it allows you to measure non-stationary spectrum. So it's other signals that are on the move. And then what's remarkable, since we're doing non-stationary, it's a much more pristine view. So we've got a lot of clarity relative to alternatives and or things that are at or below the noise floor. So that's getting quite a bit of attention. We've just started pushing that out, and we'll see where it goes. But they've got some IP. So the other story, the other leg on this, just kind of finished the thought on the validation. That's kind of the hardware piece of it. We've raised $2.8 million in private investment. We've closed over $1.6 million in R&D contracts with the National Science Foundation and the Air Force. We've got a small license with a Canadian company on a Beyond Line of Sight project, and have got a cooperative research agreement, a limited purpose one with the Naval Information Warfare Center. So there's a lot of external touch points where a lot of really smart people who are trying to solve some really big problems are starting to get their heads around what we've got here to help advance it.
And that gets into really why, besides letting more people know about what you're building, which I think is just amazing, I really wanted you on to talk about just that. So I think a lot of people in business, we hear about, doing business with the government, doing business with the military, all of that. And that really feels like this out there, the Lockheed Martins, that's who does business with the government, right? Not a startup down the road. Simply because of, just the size and red tape and the everything that you could imagine, even if you don't delve into like exactly how, you just know it's going to be this beast, right? And so just a few people go down that road. I think part of the answer is what you've built, but why has that decision been made to go down that road? And I really want to dig into what you've learned, because that was a fascinating conversation that you and I had of how that whole process in the Department of Defense is shifting and why. But what was that first kind of step in that direction?
So when we started, it was, with advices. This is something that DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Program Agency, it's where they look at all the really way far out there things for defense. We had a former program manager who was walking us into one of their groups to put together a prototype development program. And we're getting favorable feedback, thought that was going to happen Then sequestration hit, all the money got sucked out. Everybody was protecting their own existing programs. They go on a cycle. So the program manager cycles out after 3 years. They had to change the leadership. And so we're standing there with no project. We spent a lot of time and we're looking at each other, and it affirms, your initial thinking on that. It's like, what have we done? Why were we wasting our time with that? It's a dual use technology though. We were focused solely on the commercial side of things at that point. And then we stumbled into one of these AFWorks programs, not knowing what it was, what it meant, but it had special topic around it. So they were explicitly looking for things they hadn't thought of before. And the challenge we had was we would go meet with the technical folks. We had huge intellectual engagement, but the requirements were so tightly defined, they couldn't fund it. They could not
Wow.
fund it. And so it's like, okay,
And
what are the ways?
let people know what AFWorks is?
Um, I, it's the Air Force. It's a program the Air Force developed. I don't know exactly what the works even
Gotcha.
stands for, but it was small topics looking for innovation. So the crazy part about that was we were late to the game with the deadline looming. They didn't want a 20-page proposal with all the certifications and all that. It was a pitch deck, and said, okay, we've got one of those. We know where this fits generally. We aren't, um, we're not former defense, right? But let's go. So a few weeks later, we get an email that says you've won this award, but you got to tell us by 4 o'clock. Well, it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I said, well, yeah, we're in. And then we had a PO within a week. We executed that late in the day and had the fully executed deal the next morning. So that all in, that was a 5-week process. We won our first award. Well, it turns out that was the very first AFWorks cohort. So we were one of the 51st companies to get into what was this grand experiment that we didn't understand at the time, nor did anybody else. And so the reason why it was stood up, it specifically to bring innovation in because the technology gap had closed and is closing rapidly between our key adversaries, specifically the Chinese and the Russians. And the light bulb's going off is we have got to bring these small companies in and make it easier to get innovation in the door, to lessen the burden on the acquisition side of things. So that was the whole thesis of how they stood this up.
And what this was essentially, you're saying this cohort, so kind of an incubator that they're putting together.
Well, what they're trying to do is figure out a way how to accelerate bringing innovation in and migrating it into the larger programs of record or its utilities. So they know they're not seeing everything for all the reasons you say. People don't want to deal with defense. So it's to lessen the burdens on that. And, what we've discovered on that, because we also got into the first pitch day they did in New York. We've since won 2 other AFWorks awards, have got some proposals pending with that. The irony is we don't sell to the Air Force. We sell to license these technologies to the manufacturers of radios, smart devices, modems, sensors that then do sell to the Air Force. So our whole focus we had no idea of the end users, very limited understanding of how that came together, and it forced us out of our comfort zone to go meet those people, specifically with the defense, and find out, okay, what exactly is your problem set, and then figure out the migration path, the transition path.
Oh,
That's led to a prototyping only deal pipeline of about 45 million. So there are no lack of defense opportunities for Astrapi, and that's our smallest market. We address commercial satellite, we address terrestrial wireless, we address sensors. So there's an awful lot of places we can help them out, and it's growing.
Oh, that's amazing, and what great market insight too, to be able to go talk to those end users now who are actually using the products of your clients that you're helping with. That helps you not only do a better job, but the insight that now you give to your direct clients, like, hey, no, we've talked to these folks. We're doing this now because of this, and this. That's hugely valuable.
Yeah, and so you're locked in on some really, really important parts of our internal decision point. One is these contracts are non-dilutive, so we're not giving up any equity at all.
Oh,
The
wow.
second is that a lot of investors are confused with this. Is since these initial ones, even though they're small, they're competitively bid. So once that happens, you're in a position to have a sole source contract, right? So that's hugely important for someone like us and teaming partners um, for a enabling technology that addresses an awful lot of things. The other is it's dual use. So you exactly pegged on part of our decision. If we can demonstrate it um, in either commercial or defense, it's a matter of engineering it for specific use. For example, a software defined radio that would go into a CubeSat over the top fundamentally is trying to do the same thing, but then you've just got to be mill grade, radiation hardened, and maybe have mill grade encryption and some things like that. But it's fundamentally the same problem from a data throughput standpoint and an interference mitigation. That really doesn't change.
I think we think of, hey, if I'm going to go do business, sell to the government, sell to the Department of Defense, the military at large, it's an either or, right? Because and I imagine maybe there's some use cases or some specifics, but that's a surprising thing to me that you can go both directions. That the Air Force is fine with you developing this for them and going and selling it at a commercial level.
Yeah. So there's that gets into a whole slew of potential questions and framing. So your data rights, your IP rights, where that's developed and what the use is. You've got
Mm-hmm.
consideration for that sort of thing, but it also gets into the cost side of the equation. So one of the reasons why defense is I don't want to say insisting on dual use, but it's the whole premise that they can come in and get something that's existing, that's off the shelf, and then engineer it at a much lower cost for specific defense use. And it's not a one off. You're not spending $1,000 for a space hammer or something like that because you're only ordering one of them, right? So you've got the scaling to bring those costs down. And so that's some of the, and it's obviously a lot more complex than that, depending upon what you're doing and how you're trying to integrate it. But the
Sure.
bias is to try to bring that in. The other side of it is measuring who you're doing business with, right, or who you're receiving funding from, because you don't want to squirrel your ability to come in and inhibit your ability to defense contracts on where the money's coming from or who your teaming partner is and things like that.
Yeah, because that's where my mind goes with that, right? So what you just said too, it's one more indicator of a very different way that the Department of Defense is thinking about innovation in these technologies. Because
Oh yeah.
to think off the shelf at all, like, wow. Um, but that's where my mind goes, right? Is exactly there of, okay, well, if this exists everywhere, or if we develop it internally with this company is also selling it commercially, well, that means the technology is available to anyone, including our enemies, including all of that. So I imagine, again, like you said, that gets into just a complex layering to where maybe there's different degrees and different encryption and different use cases.
It's certainly that way for us.
Mm-hmm.
But be remiss not pointing out it's not just that. So when hurricane hit Mexico Beach in Florida and wiped out part of Tyndall, I think it was Tyndall Air Force Base, they had massive amount of programming to come in and establish the base of the future. So those were construction projects and all sorts of things that aren't deep tech, they aren't hypersonics or AI and stuff like that. It's okay, what can we do to improve? They've got programming to on the digital side, a lot of AI interest. The point being is medical. You get into the whole medical arena and things that you can do there. There's a big program now on vertical lift, electric vertical lift, manned and unmanned, that dovetails with some of the things that you're looking at now with air taxis and things like that. That again, you won't think of on face value, but it's dual use.
There's some nuances there, and even some experiences that you've had that really highlight those differences and how to navigate that.
Yeah, so a lot of what we focused on has been, in satellite, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Although we deal with terrestrial and other uses, and what we came to find out that there are a significant number of companies that are foreign that have U.S. defense operations. So they've got complete separate entities set up. Airbus is one of them. BAE is another that we just weren't aware of. And in one instance, one company we found out the defense side had no idea what we were doing. We've been talking to the commercial side for some time, and it turns out the government side of their house does about 10 times the revenue that the commercial side does. And so it's worth peeling away for that, because you get into dual uses, not just pulling something commercial off the shelf that can be modified for defense use. In some instances, it's companies, it's two distinct customers within one umbrella, where they've got a commercial use, but they've also got a government subsidiary. And so there's
Right.
completely different customers under the same company name.
Yeah, and honestly too, that I mean that happened on the commercial corporate side as well. I mean, I've had clients like that to where we're one little piece, a Samsung mobile, for instance, right? Like that's one little piece of Samsung, but it's worth delving in to see where else you can, now leverage that relationship and go into all these others, because they operate like completely separate companies.
Yeah, and in the defense side, it's pretty profound. It could be siloed based on the classification level of what you're doing, or again, international, the financing of the organization, all sorts of reasons where they are siloed and they can't share information, right?
Right.
I
Oh
just
yeah.
saw it today, and unfortunately, the name of the company escapes me. But it's part of one of these programs we're involved in, that they are able to demonstrate a electric unmanned vertical lift rotocraft for evacuating patients, right?
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, and you see that, and a lot of people just don't realize it's not just your little hobby kit with drones. There's some small and big companies working on some really, really cool things.
Oh yeah. I mean, that gets into, yeah, I mean, just these remote areas that can now, you know, people can survive. People can, like, it's huge. I can't remember the name. Same way, I can't remember the name of the company. Their big presence was in Ghana, getting medical supplies using drones that they actually launch. Looks like a slingshot, right? Those unmanned drones getting medical supplies out to those remote areas, that it's not just a matter of time that it would take to get to them. It's like some days you just can't if it rained, right?
Yeah.
Um, that kind of stuff is so amazing. So, what would you say to to somebody? What's that evaluation process, right, for a company, specifically a startup like you guys were, and are, and in that phase, right? Like, oh, this is, maybe now they've heard this and they've said, oh, wow, we've kind of had that in the back of our minds to work with the government in some way. What's that first step? How do they go that direction, or even
Well,
evaluate if they should?
yeah. So, it does take time, right? And so there's a sales cycle. Although it's narrowing and getting quicker, you, you can't budget for that, right? So
Sure.
we've had proposals that have been selected, which means they check on the technical deal, but the funding isn't there. So they
Mm,
kicks the can down the road. Um, I will say, with COVID, if we didn't have some defense things working, everything shut down commercially and on the investment side. So it was very fortunate we had irons in the fire there. But the timing, you really have to get better at that and really go find the defense end users and the customers, engage with them. And there's a lot of ways to do that, but it's time consuming,
sure.
and it
But I
can
liked
cost.
your, when we talked the other day too, I loved your analogy though too, that helped me reframe all of this too. It's not that different than working with an AT&T or a Lockheed Martin or one of these other giant
It,
corporations. Same mindset. It's going to take a while, right?
Yes, and aligning where you are technically with the right bucket of money and sewing together that path to make it's fundamentally no different, right? And I guess it depends on what you're trying to do and what your capabilities are. But what I always say is we're getting beat with sticks. It's just a different kind of stick, right? So it's really it's not terribly different, and it's frustrating, but at the end of the day you've got some deeply important people validating what you're doing, right? And you've got multiple pathways to come in and helps you sort through it. So you're doing the same thing any startup would do, is you're trying to validate that customer base and then stack rank and get an understanding of where you are and pivot off of that and all those sorts of things. um, but the opportunities are there, that's for sure.
And I think, again, stealing from you in our conversation the other day, I loved the insight as well of this is this is also an opportunity to help your country, right? you know, I mean, I'm all for, like, I want this conversation mainly about, the business of doing all of this, because that's how things get sustained, right? Like, that's how you are able to do this more, as if there's revenue at the other end. But it's also a pretty amazing thing to work in that capacity, and you know shore up your defenses and be a part of that without even necessarily being a part of the military.
It's very, very humbling. So a lot of what you don't. So my father served in World War II in 15 months of combat, and never talked about any of it. I'm fortunate I'm here at the end of the day. Have a brother who served, but generally we like touch for me personally. Really none. And so it is definitely a higher calling and a way to give back. And where that really hits home is, you see the people that do serve, whether they're active duty or vets, and realize some of the things they've done is quite remarkable. But it's not just them. You look at the people that are on the civilian side, whether they're in a research lab or whether they're administering contracts or whatever the story is. In most cases, they can go make more money doing something somewhere else, and it is a higher calling and having a purpose. And like I said, you don't have to be building munition systems or some crazy aircraft or you know naval ship or something else. There's an awful lot of ways to punch in and add meaning and help solve some really big problems.
I think that's one of those other mental things. And when we think about those government contracts, we just go straight to weapons, we go straight to aircraft, ships, and there's so many more. Like your company, like Astrapi, is just the
Here's,
quintessential example of.
yeah, here's something that's also come out of this that I hadn't really thought through. And I read a lot of history and all that sort of thing. And so you think in terms of warfare, you think in kinetic warfare. And it's like, okay, are we really at threat from the Russians or the Chinese attacking the east or west coast or whatever? And but what people don't really think through that's right in front of them is that's just one kind of warfare. So you get into cyber attacks, which are almost daily occurrence now and having significant impact. You've got propaganda, which is an ongoing daily impact that most people don't think of or understand. And then you got economic warfare. And some people get that and some people don't, but they don't connect it with a rogue state or an actual sovereign state that's actually at war with us and seem to ignore unconventional warfare. And it's okay, you may not think you're at war with them, but they're at war with you, right? And so I had some people kind of walk me through some of these different things and then realize the ramification of what we're doing to defend and mitigate that. And you wake up getting out of bed with a little bit different perspective and think, okay, this is important. I'll give you an example. For example, on the satellite, big deal is resilient systems, right? So back in the day, we didn't have to worry about any adversary jamming or disrupting or have a cyber attack on our satellites. Well, that day's over. There's several countries that can do it right now. And so the whole concept of coming in with resilient systems, if the SATCOM goes down on the commercial side, the defense is tied to GPS. Well, think through all the things you're dependent upon for GPS right now. and are at risk of. So that gets into the dual use deal. So the costs are coming down for LEO constellations based on lower launch costs, smaller CubeSats, small sats, different platforms with a migration of money going to fund that from the private sector. Well, who uses some of that satcom? Even though it's commercial, it's defense, right? So it's interesting to see how those are coming together. But commercials just at risk if satcom goes down from a banking standpoint, uh,
Oh
from
yeah.
navigation standpoint, you name it. There's a lot of things that are going to go bump in the night if that fails us, right?
Oh, big time. Absolutely. I love that perspective. To have that, just because you're you do this right, like you're just like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
and it just changes everything. And again, doing something like you're doing, like, okay, maybe I won't hit that snooze button. you know, let's get this meeting. Let's push to get this meeting done today, and not just push it down the road. I mean, those little things, because man, there are bigger ramifications.
yes, sir. There sure are. Um, but it's fun. It's fun too, and you meet some of these people that are at the point of the spear or backstopping them, and you see how committed they are. It's fun being around those people. And typically they are much more direct, right? They don't have a lot of time to figure stuff out, and it's boom, 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 which is really quite refreshing and helps. In the end of the day, you may not like what they're saying, but it allows you to frame what you're doing and
And move the
move
next
in.
step. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 exactly,
Oh, that's
exactly.
great. So some of those, you gave some insights there for folks wanting to kind of go down this path a little bit. Any resources for folks just starting down that path?
Yeah, so the works that the is the phrase. I don't understand what that means, but there's several organizations that are within defense that have that. So the AFWorks is one. SoftWorks is the special ops. The Space Force that stood up has SpaceWorks that I think is going to become operational maybe August, September.
Mm.
You've got DIU and the Defense Innovation Unit, the Army Applications Lab, the Air Force Futures Command are all in Austin. You've got Naval X on the Navy side of it. So they're all trying to figure this out and accelerate, and is a great entry point. And you've got an opportunity to go in and meet program managers or program executive officers that it's public information of the problem sets they're trying to solve, and can get a sanity check on what you're working on. So those are one of the ways. The other thing is on the funding front. You typically go out again. For us, we've got a limitation. We really need to know where the money's coming from an investment side. But there's a lot of investors out there that are family offices or specific to defense that they basically find you, right? So you don't see them at the typical conferences, or they're promoting through some of the different things, but they've got funds together and the domain expertise, and they may be former defense to come together. So that's been interesting to start running in some of those circles and pitching what we're doing and narrowing the gap there.
Oh yeah.
There's also a lot of retired defense that have different bridge organizations going into these different avenues. For example, there's a couple of companies that I'm familiar with that are former defense acquisition, former active duty, that help with writing small business innovation research grants.
So
And
they're kind of consultants, the pool of consultants who used to be in those roles in the military.
yeah, that's right. And then there's some nuance because there's others that are from foreign sovereign states that think basically are trying to come in and find your intellectual property, and it's an interesting way for them to wiggle in and find out some interesting things. So you got to be careful with that, depending on what you're working on. But there's a lot of
Mm.
resources, and it's like again, it's like the commercial world. Depending upon your stage and how much money you need and where your market is, that somewhat indicates which doors you need to be talking to, or at least when you need to be talking to them.
Right. Yeah, for sure. That's a huge help. This has been awesome, David. Thanks so much for being on here. How do people find out more about Astrapi and follow your journey?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. The website's www.astrapi-corp.com. Personal
That's
emails,
ASTRAPI. Yeah.
core.com. And the name, this is kind of funny, is it's Greek for lightning. And so I think
Ah,
technically it's pronounced Astrapi. None of us are Greek. Not only do we not have any defense background, none of us are Greek. But it did that because it's, you see lightning here in Texas. It tries to find a ground, lights up the night sky. Other places, it just hits a ground and it's not nearly as spectacular. So that's what we're doing with signals, is we're filling out the spectrum in ways that aren't done before. But a few years ago, I had a gentleman come up with a thick Greek accent and asked me, said, "Stapai, doesn't that mean thunder in Greek?" I said, "No, I think it means lightning." So,
like, I hope it means lightning.
it's only Greek word I know.
Yeah. Excuse me, Mr. Person who's from Greece. I'll tell you what it is. Like,
Yeah, it was pretty funny.
well,
Well, I really
wonderful.
appreciate you having me on. And anybody's got any questions on any of this, I'm happy to kind of walk them through the process, because there are some ways to shorten some paths and some things to be aware of. But we'll tell you, we've had a lot of help on that too, where I've been nervous about disclosing or engaging with other people because you really don't know fully where they stand with things. And at the end of the day, people have been extraordinarily helpful with their time and their counsel on navigating through some of the things that you need to do to get in a position to start winning some of these contracts.
Awesome. That's great. David, thank you again for being on. This is fantastic. I encourage all of you to connect with him if you have the slightest little interest in this. And if, anybody out there, also, David, that's what I want to ask too. Anything you need help with from somebody watching, from us, like getting the word out anywhere or making any connections?
Yeah, so our next step is we're working on a Series A round right now. We've got several contracts pending and more in process that help bolster the overall. What all that does predominantly is creates a need for more RF engineers. So coming in, getting electrical engineers, RF, and the idea is to build a lab here in North Texas and start taking the stem cell prototype from Xilinx into specific use cases for demonstration among the multiple applications. And it's under a licensing model. So that's looming. And it's, the requirement's really having people that like solving problems, building things, and want to work on interesting things, because this is not your grandparents' waveform capability. It is, we're defining a new field. It's a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Thanks so much, David. We'll see you all next time.
Okay. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks so much for tuning in and being a part of this show. If you ever need help building out custom strategies for your business or deciding what actions to take next, head over to MediaLeadsCo.com and let's connect. I'll talk to you soon on the next Strategy and Action.